I'm going to just give a little bit of intro to me, in who I am and what I do, and then we'll launch into what we'll be doing in the next few days. I'm an artist and researcher. I work predominantly with biological systems and imaging technologies. I'm interested in the relationships between biology and technology and society, how we relate to others, how we relate to our environment, individually and collectively. So a lot of the systems that I work with are collective systems, ecologies, superorganisms, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And a lot of them are self-organising, so there's not a control system. They don't respond to work within hierarchies. So that might manifest in working with ants, or slime moulds, or swarm robotics. I like the challenge of working with living systems because I can't control what they do. I have to negotiate with what they want to do within their own kind of reality and their own subjective experience. So I see a lot of what I do as co-creation between living systems, between human and non-human. What we're going to be doing for the next few days is a series of experiments and field work, so we'll be going out quite a lot, and then coming back. We'll do a kind of series of experiments that build one from the other, exploring the idea of the city as a superorganism. We'll be focusing on non-human networks, interactions between systems that we observe in our surroundings, and looking at kind of shifting perspectives across scale, so from our human scale to other scales, smaller or larger, and by trying to engage with other species, trying to think about our environment from a non-human perspective. So there'll be quite a lot of thought experiments and kind of trying to shift perspectives. So today we're going to be working on that perspective shifting. We'll be doing some mapping and modelling with live organisms. I'll introduce you to slime mould, one of my favourite collaborators, and we'll be doing some modelling of and relating what we do with the slime mould. Tomorrow we're going to look at stigmergic traces, and I'll explain what stigmergy is later. It's a biological communication system, and looking at sensory explorations. We're going to start off as individuals, working on individual projects, and throughout the 2 days we will build to a collective. So the nature of the experiments will change in 2 days. So, superorganism. Dictionary definition: an organised society as of a social insect that functions as one organic whole, as an organic whole. So a superorganism is a whole entity that is made up of multiple parts. So in nature we can look at a beehive as a superorganism. So a lot of eusocial insects, such as bees, operate as kind of one entity. The hive as a whole is their kind of collective identity and their priority. They often are sterile individuals that are there to help the queen reproduce and to rear the queen's young. The architecture of these superorganism societies is incredibly complex. And the social layers are too. Another is an ant colony, and this is an incredible image where they dug up a vacated ant nest. So this is the size of an ant nest. So you might have millions of ants living within that structure. Incredibly complex architecture that nobody designed. It emerged from lots of complex interactions between the colony as it grew. So the physical construction is very impressive, but it's also the social order within these superorganism systems that is also impressive. As I said, nobody is in charge here. There's not a lead ant constructing, or no foreman leading the build. It's all self-organising, and the global intelligence of the colony is emergent from all the multiple interactions between individual ants and the built-up body of knowledge that comes through those interactions over time. I've mentioned the word emergent. So a lot of the systems are emergent, and what that means is that so you have multiple individuals interacting. So there's lots of interactions. Through that, there's pattern recognition. So meaning to those interactions evolves. Feedback loops are an important part of an emergent system, and no overall control. So they're non-hierarchical. If we think about the city in relation to the superorganisms, there's conflict going on, because there's a lot of top-down imposition and built environment put on the city. But if you think about how a city actually behaves, the character and the behaviour of the city, how certain areas evolve a particular characteristic. Did somebody design the red light district, or did that evolve through a few interactions that then built over time? And think about different kind of cultural parts of the city and behaviours. So the first section is going to look at non-human networks. So networks of a non-human kind. They might have a relationship to humans, but they are not human. What I've done is collected a lot of maps of the local area that contain layers of networked information. So anyone predict what I might be about to show? What kind of networks might you see mapped in this local area?
Public transport.
Public transport. Any other thoughts? A river? Okay, so geological features. Yeah.
Pipes and gas and
Gas and utilities, infrastructure.
The internet?
The internet? Okay, so yes. Tram and metro network. So that was the first mention. So we have maps of transport networks, which has a relationship to human. Obviously, these only exist to transport humans and other things to and fro. So networks and maintenance infrastructure. So that has cars, bicycle, trams, pedestrians, different routes. Energy use across the city. So this is the use of gas and electricity. So the darker the colour, the sort of browns, is the highest use. So you can see these areas are high users. Maybe that's a power station or something, very high use. Big, kind of density around there of that kind of usage. It tends to sort of permeate out from the centre. Goes down there. Solar panels, if you want to know where. Who's energy efficient and generating their own electricity through solar panels. That's mapped. So is that the stadium? Yes. So this is the stadium, the arena. That's, I don't know, when was that built? How long ago? Any locals? No? Sorry? When the stadium, the Johan Cruyff arena?
1990 something.
Oh, 90s, okay. So it's been around well. But they're very solar friendly. Maps are also used to predict. These are forecasts of traffic. So the thicker the line, the more density of traffic. So this is projections of what traffic density may be like. So this is 2015, so this is now past. But there's prognosis for 2020, 25, 2030, anticipating, based on kind of recent trends and data, they will then predict what the density may be in the future. So maps are used not just to kind of map existing things, but also to speculate and to predict what may come. So some of these things are, are physical, tangible. The trams is a physical network. The infrastructure for energy is a physical network. But there are also maps that are looking at noise. So there's studies on decibels within certain areas. So high traffic density, mapping things that are not visible or not tangible to us, but are very much present and within our sensory experience. And some of you have been working very much, well, all of you have been working with sound the last few days. Property value, tax. So you can see the kind of economic demographics in the area. Historical. So this is sites of bombs, grenades, plane crash, air attack, machine gun fire, or damage during the Second World War in Amsterdam. So green is bombs, so there were lots of bombs or grenades or anti-aircraft guns. And it was quite distributed, mostly centred around here and there, but some fallout further out. So then there's a question, are these targeted to particular things? Were there munition factories or kind of key local authority buildings? Or is this just a kind of blitz? Political layers. The results of the local elections this year. Results per polling station with different parties related to colour. So green, I see, the Green Party is very popular in Amsterdam. Primeval Gulch, I'm not even sure what Primeval Gulch is, but it was, I couldn't resist pressing that in. Gulch, as far as I know, is like a ravine. It's a kind of a crack, a ravine in the landscape. So Primeval Gulch, maybe this is a geological shift in the land and height of land. We have ecological maps, so passageways, ecological structures in the environment, soil quality, grey is remediation areas. So this is where the soil is contaminated and needs remediation. So maybe those are old industrial sites, or where there's been some kind of toxic dump. And then blue is the cleanest. So if you're a keen gardener, you can use this map to decide where to have your endowment. And non-human life, so we can map the breeding grounds of swift sparrows and starlings. And there are dense populations in Amsterdam. So these are the patterns of movement and where these birds breed. And finally we come back to the bees, the superorganism. So this is a map of honeybees in Amsterdam. It's a very cute little bee there. So if you like honey or you want to become a beekeeper, those are where the hives are. I mean, bees have very clear flight patterns, which they evolve and share information with each other. So there will also be particular flight paths that would relate to our kind of transport networks. That's not mapped here. So this is all these maps are from this website. So if you're interested in maps, cartography, layers, do check this out. I just selected a few, but there are vast numbers. So neighbourhood and communities, you've got areas where there are cameras. So what decisions are made about which areas are observed by the state or by commercial companies. Composting. Grab a map, swimming water, summer spots, barbecues. So it ranges from leisure to kind of observation, ecological, political, economic. All these layers are, the city is a collection, a multitude of these layers of information flow, of network, movement, patterns, all kind of working together. We could call that an assemblage, an assemblage. And there's a really interesting book called Vibrant Matter by Jane Bennett, and she talks about the assemblages of material and immaterial and non-human networks kind of working together. So this system of multi-layered networks and information flows. She argues that the book Vibrant Matter is a treatise on that the matter has life, that has a kind of vitality that can affect its environment and have a direct impact. So she talks, I've got a quote from here, so the effects generated by an assemblage are emergent properties, in that their ability to make something happen is distinct from the sum of the vital force of each materiality considered alone. So this is another take on the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You may have heard that phrase before. And emergent systems are more complex. The outcome of the kind of individual components is more complex than anything that can happen from the individual components alone. And she's arguing that that an assemblage shares that same emergent properties. To give you an example, if you're interested in this is kind of new materialism, and if you're interested in this kind of idea of objects having power, she talks about this thing power of materials having agency. And the assemblage is borrowed from Deleuze and Guattari, so if we have anyone interested in philosophy, contemporary philosophy, we can have a look at that. But her example is an electrical blackout. So there's a huge blackout in North America in 2003. And to cut a long story short, essentially it was caused by humans not recognising the needs of electricity. So the causes that led up to this massive blackout, which put thousands, hundreds of thousands of homes without electricity for a long time, because the system that was built by humans wasn't resilient. And it was the decisions that were taken on how to build it were based on human efficiencies and economic needs and political desires. And nobody stopped to actually look at what the electricity needed to be able to move around this network. No one thought about the electricity. A quote for this blackout, she talks about the electrical grid as a volatile mix of cold, sweat, electromagnetic fields, computer programs, electron streams, profit motives, heat, lifestyles, nuclear fuel, plastic, fantasies of mastery, static legislation, water, economic theory, wire and wood, to name just a few of these actants. And she's saying actant as a vibrant matter. And what you might notice about this is some are material. Coal is a tangible physical material. Sweat is something tangible, a result of hard work or stress. But some of these things, fantasies of mastery, is in a state of mind. So she's thinking very broadly about all the layers that actually work together in any kind of system. So these are very much a human, psychological, or character, and she's given them the same place as the sort of physical and the informational flows. Any thoughts or comments on this? Yeah.
But then the blackout could also be considered an emergent property of the system that regulated itself then in a way that adaptations were probably made to make the system more resilient.
Yeah.
So in a way it's not a failure but an adaptation process that happened. But for the humans involved it was a catastrophe probably.
But yeah, exactly, because it depends on your perspective. If you want the electricity, you're saying, well, this environment doesn't work for me, so I will behave differently. So yeah, who's the expectation? If you're thinking from electricity's point of view, then it's just, well, this system doesn't work. This environment is not conducive to what I need. It doesn't provide me with the resources, the kind of the passage that I need. so it stops working. From the human perspective, that's a failure. But from other perspectives within this system, it may not be a failure. Any other thoughts or questions or half thoughts about this idea of these kind of complex, layered systems? Yeah.
Questioning myself with the idea of like the human or the non-human network, because could we say that there's a non-human network since the idea of like the network is defined by a human, So in the case of like, I don't know, like architecture or disease or language or whatever, is it like a network or it's more like a kind of like a mixed match of like, assemblage or
how would you define a network?
Yeah.
Let's do that. Agree what we think of as a network. Because some of these things will be networks, and some will not be networks, but they will be components within a complex system, and that system then becomes a network. So who would like to define network?
So maybe it goes to the idea of like cybernetics, a system where basically each component are like altering others.
Yeah, so there has to be some communication, some information flow within a network. Would we say it needs to be multi-directional? That it's not just in one way? Yeah. What other kind of characteristics? Yeah.
There's also no one managing, like no entity. If I think of my friend network or whatever network, there is no one who kind of made the connections from above, but all of the people kind of have an influence of who connects. Or like who comes together to the network and who goes.
Yeah. I mean, some networks have elements of control within them, and we know that from thinking about current debate around social media platforms and algorithm controls and influence that affects how that network operates. Or a network of electricity grids. There's in some ways that network behaves as things are moving within that system in multiple directions through different nodes and points of connection. But there may be elements of control. Not always. It depends whether what kind of network we're talking about.
Like in a network, it's very raison d'etre, that everything connects and communicates. You know what I mean? That's its very essence. I think if it's if it's something that isn't a network, it kind of is something that happens organically, and its essential nature isn't, or its reason for existing isn't to communicate. It just happened. That's how I see it.
Okay. But I'm thinking about something like an ant colony, where communication is at the very core of the network.
But that would be a network. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a network as opposed to something, an assemblage or something that happens organically.
Yeah. But if we think about, so we have separate networks, but they aren't in isolation. So an ant colony doesn't just exist in a vacuum, it exists in relation to its environment, and so the network will adapt to environmental change. And one of the key differences between organic networks and human networks is this idea of adaptability and resilience. So the reason this failed is because the network didn't have built-in resilience. It couldn't adapt to a shift in flow or an overusage or a break in the system, and the whole thing collapsed. This is, there's a lot of areas in architecture, in urban design, in transport networks that are looking to non-human, to biological network systems. Not just as a kind of biomimetic inspiration, but also looking at how can we build human systems to be more resilient, to be more adaptable. Because if you're building a transport network, it is all physical, it's steel and electricity and power. it's not as adaptive as something that is purely organic and biological.
I don't know if that's like a primitive point of view, but a network needs like a common ground, at least one common ground.
Do you have an example?
Like for an ant colony, at least it needs, it's the species that defines the common ground, but for like the social media, it defines like the common ground as that the internet access or something like that.
Yeah. Or with social media, you could argue that the echo chamber provides that kind of safe environment where we can feel in the way that an ant colony, a nest provides that safe environment for the ants to survive.
So could you also say that a network is created by individual intents? You know, that there's an individual intent, just like the ant has the individual intent of moving in that direction and making, I don't know, a little hole there. And then on a larger scale, you can perceive a pattern that the individual isn't necessarily aware of, but from the larger scale, you see, oh, well, now I have that whole network of pathways here that then you observe and go, wow, that's interesting that came about like this. Where you have that shift in scale, that on a certain scale, it's nothing, you just see there's no regularity, but on a larger scale, you say, oh, now I can see that there is something regular about it. And then also time-wise, where you would say, oh, if I just look at that little time frame, it was a disaster, a blackout. But on the larger time scale, you say, oh, that was the adaptive mechanism, then that shifted and this shifted, and now I have a network that is more resilient.
I think I'll come back to those points. I'll just address this one first. So this is really important, this idea of scale and time. The individual within the collective. And these are things that we'll be thinking about over the next few days. And with the case of an ant colony, the individual ant is rather stupid. Doesn't have a lot of neurons. It's a very small brain. It doesn't have a clue what's going on in other parts of the colony. It's just doing its thing. It's just going foraging if it's in foraging duties, or it's cleaning up. And the intelligence comes from the amount of communication that passes between individual ants. So ants, we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but they're in constant communication with each other. And it's that information flow through the network that builds a global intelligence. Within an ant colony, there isn't one ant looking from above to recognise that. So, unfortunate for the ants, they don't even realise how amazing they are. But we can look down and we can study and understand how these systems are working and take a top-down view of the whole system. So zooming in and out is something that we'll be doing. So we're trying to really kind of zoom into different scales in terms of from micro to macro, but also thinking about time, a moment in time, a long period of time. So the first experiment for today is perspective taking. So what I'm going to ask you to do is a very simple exercise. So accompanied by a notebook and pen, so you should all have your pocket-sized notebooks, or if you don't have that, if you have something else, a sketchbook or something, but something small, easy to jot down notes. You're going to walk the streets, observing non-human networks at play. So you're thinking about some of the things we've been talking about and the maps we've been looking at, so it could be infrastructure, power, traffic, animal, microorganism, waste, or whatever you observe. And note their points of connection and how they kind of relate to each other, how they exist, whether they exist on their own or in relation to other networks. The guidelines to walk alone. So avoid others in the group. This is a solitary activity. Walk intuitively. So be aimless. Don't think, oh, I want to get to this point. Just go wherever your body and your eyes and your senses take you. Roam freely and just really try to slow down and tune in to your surroundings. If you spend the next half hour in a really kind of small area, that's okay. If you want to kind of roam, you just go wherever you intuitively find yourself. You can take photos if you want, but the main focus is to observe. So this is an observation exercise. and to document in your notebook. You choose how you want to document, so it could be mapping, a kind of journey or routes, or sketching what you see, or it could be in written words, it could be phrases, commentary. It's entirely up to you. But this is analog documentation, so pen on paper, documenting your observations. We'll start off together, set your timers at 30 minutes, and then you don't have to worry about the passing of time, you just roam, and then when your timer goes off, has everybody got a timer on a phone? Anybody not got a phone? Silly question. Just thought I'd ask. Okay. So yeah, after 30 minutes, then stop what you're doing and head straight back here. And then what we're going to do is use that material to create some maps. Okay, shall we go?